begin by acknowledging the fact that many authors of Cooper's time were heavily criticizing Cooper for his messy plots which lack romance, for his poor knowledge of the Native Americans' history, and even for his use of language. One example is Mark Twain's Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses, and you can see here how harsh Twain attacked Cooper for his style, calling, for example, The Deerslayer just simply a literary delirium tremens. He says it's no work of art, it has no invention, no order, and finally he says that the English language featuring there is a crime against the language. However, the fact remains that Cooper wrote very significant things about the so-called forbidden knowledge, which deals with race, slavery in America, with oppression in general, and so on. So, especially in the Leatherstocking Tales, he deals with two main things. The first would be the mainland colonial slave codes, and the second thing is the disagreement between the British and the American policy on intermarriage, because the Americans were against intermarriage and the British were trying to enforce intermarriage because of the trade. Here, for example, in the Leatherstocking Tales, he does display significant knowledge of the Indian cultures, which he, as I said, gained during his childhood, where he was growing up in the surrounding woods of New York and talked to many people who belonged to the Iroquois nation. So we can say that Cooper was personally acquainted with people like Natty Bumppo, and this is where his knowledge came from. What I'm particularly interested in is this topic of institutional racism in colonial America, which we can see on the example of these characters: Cora, Magua, Hawkeye, and Monroe himself. Let's begin with Cora Monroe. She is a lady who has this misfortune of being of mixed origin. She's half black, half white. She is descended from African slaves. Her mother came from the British West Indies, and the Caribbean were a dreadful place of slavery where a small number of women were slaves there, and because there was so little of them, most of them became sex slaves, which we call concubinage in English. However, not many people were rich enough to afford these black sex slaves, so having a concubine would be a luxury back then. And of course, at some point in time, mixed children were started being born. However, they were killed by 1713 because it was a shame to have a mixed child, and it was against the American law. After 1713, however, these children started being reared. They were not killed anymore because they noticed that after each generation their skin was becoming whiter, and they did anything to conceal the fact that they had black blood in them. So, for example, they would even try to hide those children from the sun so that their complexion would remain as light as possible. Why am I saying all this? Because judging by the historical American law, which was against intermarriage, Cora is supposed to be seen as a slave in America. So she was not actually Colonel Monroe's daughter. She was, but at the same time, she should be seen as his slave. This is why Colonel Monroe tries to hide the fact of Cora's true origin. So, for example, Colonel Monroe at one point thinks that Hayward is in love with Cora, and he has to tell Hayward the truth. And Hayward is shocked at the possibility of even considering marriage with Cora, because they would both be arrested if that marriage took place. To wrap it up, In colonial America, intermarriage was a felony. It was against the law, and Cora should be seen as a slave as well as Monroe's daughter. And we have to know this part of history in order to get a greater understanding into the things that Cooper dealt with. I singled out two quotes for you to see how Cora adores Alice's fair skin and laments the fact that she doesn't have fair skin. For example, when she says, Alice is fair, oh, how surpassingly fair, laying her own beautiful but less brilliant hand in melancholy affection on the alabaster forehead of Alice, and parting the golden hair which clustered about her brows. And yet her soul is pure and spotless as her skin. So apart from being the ideal pale blonde girl, Alice is also sinless. Then the narrator goes on to say, the tresses of this lady, meaning Cora, were shining and black, like the plumage of the raven. Just look at the comparison. The narrator compares Cora to the raven, which is a bird connected to death. Her complexion was not brown, but it rather appeared charged with the color of the rich blood. So she was not actually black, but there was a hint beneath her white skin that she has a bit of black blood in her. So how does Cora feel about this? Well, surprisingly, Cora will try throughout the novel to defend the white people. Why is this? Because she's afraid of her African self. She's afraid of that black blood that runs through her veins. So when Magua kidnaps Cora and tries to say that Colonel Monroe was very cruel to him, Cora sides with her father, and Magua is surprised because he thought Cora would support him. However, Cora does not see the Indians or the blacks as her people. She wants to think that she's only white. And this is one type of institutional racism that is discussed in this novel. While Cora always thinks of herself as white, at the same time, Hawkeye insists that he is white. So Cora has a hint of blackness in her, whereas Natty wants to be white all around. In fact, some critics say that Cooper intended Hawkeye also to be a crossblood, like Cora, to have Indian blood in him and to pass for a white person. We cannot be sure. There are not so many hints in the novel to support this theory that Natty Bumppo is half Indian. Maybe because he supports the Indians so much, we can say that he sees himself as half Indian, but he never says that he's Indian. He likes to think of himself also as white, so he supports the white people as well as the Indian people. Maybe if we see Natty Bumppo as being half Indian, it will be much easier for us to understand why he never married. Because if he had married a white woman, for example, it would be offense for his Indian blood. I have to explain this by referring to their religion and their Christianity later on. As I said, the Americans were against intermarriage, but the British encouraged marriage between the races because of the trade. The British were there in America to earn money through fur trade, and the only way to do trade in America at the time was through kinship. So if you wanted to buy or sell something, you needed to have a kin in that family of the Indians. This is the reason why the British encouraged interracial relationships so that they could buy fur off the Indians. So usually many Englishmen who would marry Indian women simply because of trade, once they went back home to England, they would have other women, white brides and white children, and they were never even accused of bigamy, for example, although their Indian women were their first wives. All this that I described, many critics see as America's original sin. Um, what was going on with religion at the time was that they also tried to enforce, I mean the British, Christianity to these native peoples, the Indians, and there were some Indians who accepted Christianity as their religion, but once they did, they were not considered Indians anymore. Why did they do this? Because if an Indian accepted Christianity and married a white woman, then this marriage could be recognized as legal, even in America. But still, they were called the slaves of the Europeans because they accepted a religion that was not actually their own. This is also a significant fact that you can see in the slide. It says all Indians, even mixed, could be murdered at will and without consequence by the pioneers. The pioneers are the conquerors, the first people who settled in America. So Indians were seen just as animals, and even if they killed an Indian, they would not be held responsible. So I think this is really cruel and should be acknowledged as part of Cooper's criticism in the novel The Last of the Mohicans. If we were in the classroom, I would probably ask you what you think about the situation being a mixed child. Would it be more difficult for you if you were half Indian, half white, or half black, half white? So just think about this question. I usually ask this during the exam. Finally, I said I wanted to explain this, that Natty had no kin, he avoided sexual relationships, and he died childless. If he was a crossblood who passed for white, he would have to avoid Indian women because he would be suspicious. And if he were to be with a white woman, that would be offensive for his Indian blood. So this was a no-win situation, or as we say, catch-22. This is why Cooper decides Natty should be left alone and with no children, so that no misunderstandings could arise from his character. What's certain is that through the character of Leatherstocking, Cooper significantly improved our understanding of the racial positions in America of the time as he explored the interracial relationships and all the things that could arise from it, all the prejudices, the social system. And I think this is really important to understand, especially because of all the negative reviews that Cooper had during his age, including the one that I showed you by Mark Twain. So this is it. You're going to do a quiz on Cooper, and then you will read with Atza one part from The Last of the Mohicans. I chose the part where Chingachgook and Hawkeye are discussing something very important, which you will be able to discuss in your tutorial as well with your assistant. See you soon.